Okay, now I'm going to tell another story about my very short stint of all I could stand of the Pacific Coast Highway going from Los Angeles on south. I left out to try a trip from California back to New York. And that's another story about a lot of it, but the way it started was December 5th, 2021. My friend Candy was already going to take a trip out west, so she let me ride along with her. And we went and saw a bunch of stuff from West Virginia on down to Georgia. We did some of Route 66, and the plan was for her to drop me off in Los Angeles, and then with my bike and stuff, I start on my way. The first or second day in, it was really early on. The first day, I think we were only in Pennsylvania, I noticed my little dog had a suspicious lump on her armpit. The night before, we had an early family Christmas get together, and she was squeaking funny when people would pick her up to say hello. And I looked at her, I didn't see anything wrong. I didn't think about it. It was a new thing. Anyway, now that showed we were in a situation. I was in a situation. I had to get her to a vet, and I have already left home. I don't have an address. I have no plans to stay around. I've got to go. So we found a veterinarian in Vicksburg, Mississippi that was going to be on our route who was willing to take Migs on short notice. Dr. Goodwin from Countryside Animal Clinic on Rifle Range Road in Vicksburg, Mississippi. So when we got to Mississippi, she examined Migs and indeed thought she needed to be operated on, and was so kind to be able to get her in first thing the next day. So we dropped Migs, we got a motel, dropped Migs off in the morning, and went and killed some time looking at the Mississippi River and whatnot. And I got a phone call that while they had her on the table, there were additional lumps, 3 altogether, to ask my permission if they could take them all, of course. So the surgery was longer than we thought. And I will mention that when I went to pay for this surgery, I don't travel with much money. I don't have much money. My dear friend Shar had called ahead with her debit card to pay for most of it. I am so grateful. So grateful. So anyway, we continued on our journey from Vicksburg with Migs all stitched up and sitting on my lap and all pathetic. It looked like a little tiny broken wing. We made it all the way to Los Angeles, and my friend Candy dropped me off. I asked to be dropped off on Dockweiler Beach because I had been there before. I was familiar with the area. And I remember her dropping me off, and they were in a bit of a hurry. She had picked up her friend at the airport, and they had to get somewhere. And every time I begin a bike tour, I'm nervous. I feel real sick. I get the cough gags. I shake. And I remember I was shaking, packing up my stuff, and her friend is trying to help me, and I was shaking all over. It's nerve-wracking. I'm getting dropped off in Los Angeles by myself on a bicycle, and it was almost sunset. So, we said our goodbyes, and I start off down the bike trail there. And I pretty quickly camped behind a little building on a beach in El Segundo. And I had a fine night, slept fine all night. But I was woke up in the morning by some El Segundo cops who didn't want any homeless camping there. And that's fine. You know, I had to pack up. I'm not debating, should I tell this story? I'll tell this story. Okay, the cops, when they told me to leave, I had to zip my tent up and start packing my things. But I had to go to number 2 really, really bad. Like, it was no questions. I had to go. But the cops continued to stand there just having conversation among themselves, not even about me, just they were standing at the back of my tent, just talking, and I had to go really bad. So the vestibule part of the tent that comes out, I dug a nice deep hole in the sand, and dug it all up, And I positioned myself, and I went, oh, the cops standing right there. Nobody could see me. Oh, God. And I had to fill it back in with sand really quick. It was like an agony. What do they call it? An agony of propriety. There was nothing I could do, and I had to do it. And I had to do it, and nobody had to know. And now I had to tell people on YouTube, so now people know. But, yeah, I had to poop just feet away from El Segundo policemen. So I packed up, and what I needed was advice on camping, because there was no way with Migs' sutures that we could travel any distance. They would tear it. It's not going to be good for her. So I had to find a veterinarian there where I was at who would be willing to see her and take her stitches out. And meanwhile, I had to find a place to camp. So I found, I think it was LAPD, like Beach Patrol. I went and talked to him, and I remember he said, oh yeah, El Segundo cups are pretty effing gnarly. He gave me advice where I could camp down at Playa del Rey. There was a small homeless camp that the police were just kind of letting slide there because they had been doing a lot of cleaning up homeless camps and forcing everybody to kind of move other places in the city, mostly Skid Row. So he advised me probably nobody would bother me down there at Playa del Rey. So I went down there, and there was a restroom that was out of order. There was a porta pot behind it. And it was a big stone permanent restroom building with kind of a portico out front with a roof but no walls. And that comes in later in the story. Under this portico, people that didn't want to go in the porta pot, that were just taking walks along the bike trail that was right behind it, it was right on the bike trail, just were peeing in the corner of this portico. And there's a lot of human urine in Los Angeles, everywhere in the streets, everywhere you go, you smell people. It's called bum piss. You smell bum piss in a lot of places there, and it's normal there. And I don't want to say too much about that right now. That's how it is in Los Angeles. So a lot of people have been peeing up under there. That's fine. I could camp in front of it down in the sand. That wasn't a problem. And there were a couple other homeless gentlemen there that didn't bother me, and the policeman vouched for them anyway, so we never really had any contact with each other. So I was okay there, and I did find a vet, and I had to wait so many days for the stitches to come out anyway, so I was going to be there roughly maybe a week or so. I can't really remember. In that time, it wasn't so bad. We were only about 6 miles of an easy bike ride with nice either bike trail or bike lanes to Venice Beach. So Migs and I went back there, and because I had been there before with my daughter and her fiance, so I went back there, and I got to meet one of my favorite YouTube stars, German in Venice. The guy's name is Mike, and that was really nice getting to meet him and take my picture with him and sit down and talk. So Migs and I just basically, our plan was to kill time and try to stay safe there on the beach in front of that restroom. But then what happened, I refer to it now in hindsight as the Great Deluge. They said it was the worst storm to hit the West Coast in 10 years. And it was even going on up in Seattle. And not only was it rain, but it was freezing up there, and cars were sliding down the hills. And it was hitting Los Angeles too. And that was on its way. And indeed it did hit. And it hit bad. So as it was hitting, I realized my tent isn't okay out on the beach anymore. The wind is going to take it. And mind you, any beach is windy on any given day. But this is an enormous storm sweeping in. Sorry. I had my tent moved behind a stone barrier that was part of like the front of the restroom. And I realized pretty quick that's not going to work. And I wish in hindsight I hadn't done this. I had taken some extra time to take all my stuff out of the tent. But it was a bit of a panic mode. I mean, it was getting bad. I took the chance and I dragged my tent. And I dragged it up under the pissy portico. And during the next few days, as I had those pinholes in my tent, rain soaked in human urine was coming up into my tent, I was one of the lucky ones, because I would unzip the tent to look out sometimes, and it was taken homeless tent. I mean, that you could see up the beach, the few that were there. I was lucky to be under that portico. All Migs and I could do was just kill time in that tent. And what helped was the awareness of how grateful I was to be safe and that my tent wasn't being ripped down. I had at least some partial wind block up under there. But we were under there for a few days like that. It was awful. I had to keep, it was so windy, I had to keep the weight of myself in a tent. And boy, this story is getting gross. I had to tinkle in a soup can and fling it out because I was afraid my weight getting out of the tent, the wind was going to take the tent in a lot of moments during those days. It was bad. When it was finally over, we still had to stay there on the beach, but I was finally able to go up into Playa del Rey. And when I mean up a very steep hill, to get to a laundromat, sit there in my skivvies as much as I felt comfortable, get everything washed, sleeping bag, everything. Oh, it felt so good. It felt so good to wash up. And in LA, they have beach showers. I mean, they're outdoors, but you could do what you need to do, even if you got clothes on, even if it's cold. You can do what you got to do. It was so nice to get clean. So I was able to move the tent back out to the sand area in front of the restroom after that. There was one day when I noticed a man, he kept coming by too often, looking at me and my stuff too often. He had a hat on and a COVID mask, but it was black, and sunglasses, zero face. It made me nervous enough that I drank coffee and stayed up all night to keep an eye on my stuff, because he just, I don't know what he kept looking at, but I was just trying to stay safe. Then I got another bit of help. My sister and her husband have a friend that was close to my area, and they were able to get me a motel for a few days until the veterinary appointment. Oh, I was so grateful. So when I had to leave the beach, I quickly found that navigating through the urban traffic in the LA area on a bicycle, like 6 miles, will take over an hour. It's crazy. So I remember the motel I found wasn't that far away, and it was only, I checked it out today, 6.1 miles from the vet where I had her appointment at. It took me a long time to get to that motel and a long time to later get to that vet appointment. Oh my goodness. So I stayed at that motel. I remember trying Indian food for the first time. My cousin helped me with the vet expenses, getting the stitches out. That was so kind. So then I continued on in pretty fair weather down the Pacific Coast Highway. My plan was to go down to San Diego and then start east. So that was what I was working with in my mind at the time. But I quickly noticed the Pacific Coast Highway started to feel like the Twilight Zone to me. I've learned in my travels that I don't care for urban areas. I like to be able to stealth camp, tuck off. I like the quiet of the woods. I don't like light pollution, noise pollution. There's a lot of pollution in those areas. So much urine and feces on the street, needles. Every time I felt like I was getting out into a more secluded area, I would see high rises in the distance. It was just like the Twilight Zone. I couldn't get out of the city. I made it down, I don't know through how many towns and cities, to a state park that was really, really expensive. It was something like 60 some a night, and you had to buy tokens for the shower, and it was a cold shower. And more rain came. There was a lot of rain that was happening. Eventually it turned into mudslides. And where I was at was that soil called caliche. It's just like concrete. The stakes wouldn't go in, so I just lay there at night with the rain blowing up under the rain guard, because once again, I'm right on the ocean and plenty of rain. I was up on a cliff. So that was miserable. I really was falling to pieces with discouragement at that point. It was getting close to Christmas, And to this day, I need to have it remain anonymous. Who got me a motel room for Christmas Day? And there was a restaurant open so I could get food because everything was closed. So I can't say who did that. But I was able to leave the rainy campground and get to a motel for Christmas Day. In that motel, I got advice through a Facebook friend who had previously lived in that area. If you don't want to be in the urban, stop going south, start cutting east. So that was the advice I took. I started cutting east, and I wanted to see the Salton Sea anyway. It was on my bucket list, and Slab City. So that's what I did. And as it turns out, if I hadn't heeded that advice, I was literally about 24 to 48 hours ahead of some serious mudslides behind me on the Pacific Coast Highway, where the mud was coming down into the road off the cliffs and stranding people at campgrounds with big washes coming through, with just brand new rivers forming, and they couldn't get out of where they were at. And I would have been on a bicycle in that. So I guess that kind of ends rather anticlimactically, but I'm telling real life stories, and they don't fit a neat pattern where there was a climax and then a nice neat ending. That was just my experience of that segment of the Pacific Coast Highway until I had absolutely enough of the Pacific Coast Highway and started cutting east. And then the Salton Sea and Slab City, those are tales for another day. I hope you guys are enjoying these. If you have any feedback or things you'd like me to talk about, subjects, I'd be really interested to hear it. So that's all.